Good evening, Brennan. Welcome to the Lodge Hope of Karachi number 337 and our lockdown lecture series, Zoom meeting number 49. I know across the country we've been hit with a huge snow dump, Brennan, so please stay safe when you're out bringing the bins in and out. And if you don't have to go out, just stay tucked up inside, nice and warm. I know some of you do want to go out and play Snow Angels, so don't get caught. That's to you, brother Tom Edgar. It's one of our angels from Midlothian. So, Brian, once again, can I remind you of the Grand Lodge of Scotland guidance? Please keep your video on and a recognisable name in the video screen. Thank you very much. As ever, can I ask you to sign our virtual tile on our Facebook pages so we've got a record for our minutes as we go forward. Brian, I'm delighted to welcome back one of our overseas guests. He's not technically overseas because he's also a member of a Scottish lodge in Edinburgh. But brother Rolf Kiel is back with us this evening to give us the second half of his presentation into the history of Freemasonry in Germany. Many of you will remember that Rolf was with us in the old year and talked about the early development of Freemasonry in Germany up to and around the Second World War. This evening, Rolf's going to take us from that sort of 1930s through to the present day. So without further ado, Brian, I give the floor to brother Rolf Kiel.
Good evening, brethren. I try to, okay. Do you see my screen?
Yes, that's perfect, Rolf.
Good. So it's good to be back and for another volume of Freemasonry in Germany and our very complicated ways to do things. Before we have a closer look at the events that finally brought us a kind of unity into the craft in Germany, we need to recall the situation before the Nazi regime. Okay. Remember, in the situation of Germany built together from independent countries, formed together as a state in 1871. There was 9 recognized Grand Lodges. First, the old Prussian Grand Lodges, the Grand National Mother Lodge of the Three Globes, the National Grand Lodge of Freemasons in Germany, which we call GLL, the Great Lodge of Prussia, the Great Lodge of Hamburg, Grand Lodge Cezanne in Bavaria, the Grand Lodge of Saxony, the Grand National Mother Lodge of the Eclectic Union, the Grand Lodge Concord in Darmstadt, and the Grand Lodge of Fraternal Chain in Magdeburg, and others. So these were the recognized Grand Lodges in Germany. At its height, around about 80,000 brethren in Germany, never more. And beside these recognized Grand Lodges, there were 2 others that came up in the Weimar Republic. These Grand Lodges were not recognized, but they are important for the further development of the craft, as you will see. This was the Freemason Association of the Rising Sun in Nuremberg, and even more important, the Symbolical Grand Lodge of Germany. The Symbolic Grand Lodge was brought to life by the newly founded Supreme Council in the year 1931. It was shunned by all other Grand Lodges, but it was the only one in strict opposition to the rising Nazi ideology. And the Symbolic Grand Lodge closed its gates in April 1933, shortly after the birth of Lodge Spinoza, the last lodge which was founded before the Dark Times. The Masonic light of the Symbolic Grand Lodge was brought to Israel, where it had 5 lodges working. Most of the humanitarian Grand Lodges closed also its gates in 1933, while the old Prussian Grand Lodges, together with the Grand Lodges of Hamburg, Saxony, and Zeebrugge, had tried to come to an agreement with the new powers and styled themselves as national Christian orders, adopted the Arian rule, and forcing the Jewish members to leave and severing all ties to Freemasonry. Goering's edict from 1935 brought an end to all this pandering to the Nazi movement. In the review, the craft in Germany as a whole can be glad that these moves of appeasement were not successful. Freemasonry did not exist for 12 years. Some brethren continued to meet as bowling clubs or go hiking together, playing cards. And of course, the craft was used as a perfect scapegoat by the Nazi regime. But the question we have to face is, was the craft indeed a victim of the Nazi regime? And on that question, I give you my personal view, not unfounded, but my personal view. Like the majority of the people of Germany, the majority of Freemasons accepted, to say at least, the Nazi regime. There was discrimination against former Freemasons in business and in daily life. There was a looting of the temples and a serfdom of the halls and treasure. Very seldom did former Freemasons face serious consequences. In 1938, they issued an amnesty for those Freemasons that had left the craft before the seizure of power and didn't hold a higher position than the third degree. Some brethren held contact through the dark years. They met as friends, to play cards, to go hiking, etc. So although the Nazi government condemned it. Was this resistance? There were Freemasons in active resistance, but very few. From those few men, a majority came from the unrecognized Grand Lodges of the Rising Sun and the symbolic Grand Lodge. German Freemasons were sentenced to concentration camps. Again, most of them from the unrecognized Grand Lodges. And even these were hunted because they were labor union leaders, political authors, politicians, and so on. So I come on this case to my personal conclusion that the brothers of that time were in no way different from the rest of the people. They made their decisions out of their attitude and out of their experience. Nobody is able to tell what he would have done in their shoes. So it's not for me to judge, but we do have the responsibility to tell the truth as we understand it, might it be convenient or not. Now, let's jump to the times and we face the year 1945. And hopefully this works. It was summer 1945. Germany lay in ruins. The town of Frankfurt suffered from the consequences of the war. 80% of the buildings were destroyed and or heavily damaged. The government was replaced by the military authorities of the occupation forces. Millions of women, men, and children were uprooted, displaced, missing, injured, or dead. Freemasonry in Germany was not in existence. The temples were disowned or destroyed, be it because of the Roman Church, the Nazi propaganda, or maybe because the politics of integration by some of the old Grand Lodges. For many Germans at that time, Freemasonry was somehow suspicious. But even in these troubled times, where the daily struggle to survive has dictated the everyday necessities. There were men in which the light of Masonry was still alive. The two lodges, Goethe in Offenbach and Spinoza in Frankfurt of the symbolic Grand Lodge, had together 36 members before 1933. This is a membership list. And in September 1945, of those 36 brethren, 5 brethren had died. One brother was deported. The last message that came from him was from the Warsaw Ghetto. 3 brethren has left because they had gained membership in the Nazi Party. 5 brethren were missing. 14 brethren still lived in Offenbach or Frankfurt in the Rhine-Main area. In summer 45, a few brethren of the Lodge Spinoza and its mother lodge Goethe met with the objective to find out if the lodges could be revived. They agreed that both lodges were too small to start again. Brother Emil Zelte, a doctor in Frankfurt, remembers that meeting in his speech at the occasion of the 25th anniversary of the foundation of Lodge Lessing. 26 September 45, I visited a flat with very restricted space at the Kaiserplatz in Frankfurt. Brother Geyer, one of the brothers of the lodge, had invited 11 men, Freemasons who had survived the persecution by the Nazi regime and the horrors of war, willing to make a new start on the base of the experience of the past. The lodge's names Spinoza and Goethe could be spoken out loud without fear. Other names of lodges arose, bringing back painful, pitiful, sometimes joyful memories. Systems were discussed. Old landmarks were recited from memory, all mingled with news from captivity, from concentration camps, or from the brothers in exile. The name Lessing was dropped. Lessing, the epitome of joyfulness and skepticism, with brilliant wit and with a sharp view of the human weaknesses. A worthy name for a lodge. The first step was made. The struggle with the bureaucracy and with the military authorities could start. The struggles with the mills of bureaucracy led to a paradox. The foundation of societies were not allowed by the military authorities, but reanimation was. So the new lodge gave the 26 October 1930 as its date of its foundation, indeed being the date of the foundation of Lodge Goethe in Offenbach. The new lodge started to work with great optimism and zeal. On the 30th December 1945, a first degree was worked, which was with high certainty one of the first Masonic degrees worked in the occupied Germany. The temple was erected in the flat of Brother Geyer. The tracing board was carried out with white paint on a black piece of paper. Everything had to be improvised. Nevertheless, it must have been a remarkable evening. Brother Zelte, the worshipful master, states in his speech from December 1945, "My brothers, the world which we bear inside ourselves is most precious, and it is mostly in our own power to build it pure, big, and beautiful. Neither time nor external circumstances can damage it. I know some of my brothers have the view that only a beautiful, perfect temple can bring into the mood we need for a successful degree, but I am convinced that it is the inner feeling that enables us to forget about the external circumstances, which are not always beautiful." In January 46, the new lodge had to face the first setback. The military government for the region of Frankfurt declared the Freemasons Lodge Lessing falls in the category of secret organizations which hold secret meetings and as such is not permitted to operate regardless of previous granted permission. Fortunately, the ground was prepared and the lodge did survive. They received an official permit by the authorities in May 47. Notwithstanding the ban, the brethren started to obtain the working tools for the lodge. They worked out the bylaws and they made the first draft of the new lodge carpet. The brothers decided not to use any of the old rituals. Instead, a new ritual should be used carrying elements of all the Masonic systems in Germany. The ritual was written out of memory by Brother Zelter in the years 45 to 47. And today, this ritual is still worked in my mother lodge, and it's one of the few recognized and officially permitted rituals within the Grand Lodge AF and AM in Germany. And here you see the second stated meeting took place in the surgery of Brother Zelda. He was a doctor. While the first ritual work, a painted carpet, was used from 1946 on, the lodge used a small carpet, sewn by hand and made of the remnants of uniforms and banners. The carpet was made after a sketch by Brother Zelda of the carpet of Lodge Spinoza, used in 1933. The original was seized by the Nazis. In those days, of course, there were no shops for lodge furniture or regalia, at least not in Germany. So everything had to be made by hand with the most primitive tools and materials. For the brothers of this new lodge, it was very clear that a renewal of the craft could not go without unification and a merger of the old Grand Lodges. Therefore, they made no attempt to join the symbolic Grand Lodge, where the two mother lodges of Lessing belonged to. This had been possible because the symbolic Grand Lodge was still working in Palestine. They decided to stay independent until the formation of a new United Grand Lodge of Germany. Zelda wrote in an article of this year, "After the terrible breakdown, there is no space for the hunger of power or the greed of glory, for egomania of single lodges or Grand Lodges. What counts is a Masonic attitude. The question is, should we, although we are all Freemasons, stay divided and estranged? Or should we find a forum where the craft can reach an agreement?" On the 11th November 1945, the Grand Lodge of Germany to the old charges was founded, and it was hoped by many that this would be indeed the one Grand Lodge of Germany, at least for the humanitarian branch of Masonry. In December 1945, Lodge Lessing joined the new Grand Lodge and received the charter in January. This is the handwritten charter which Lodge Lessing received. But the dreams of a renewed and united craft were premature because of the ban against secret organizations. In December 1946, the new Grand Lodge was forced to close, while on the other hand, on the 18th of May 1946, the renewed Old Prussian Grand Lodges were officially permitted to work. In 1947, finally, all Masonic activities were permitted, and now the lodges could meet in the open. There were still some restrictions. An edict of the US military government called "The Masonic Lodge is approved under following conditions. During each election period, a committee of 3 members known to be anti-Nazi shall be responsible for, first, a review of the membership, second, non-political objectives of the meetings, and third, the maintenance of a membership list which shall be available for the military government upon request. Candidates needed to show a questionnaire where any affiliations to the Nazi movement and its organizations ought to be declared. This is this questionnaire there. Candidates needed to show a questionnaire, and every meeting at the time needed permission by the military and later by the civil authorities. Apparently, we leave our tiny lodge for a while to get a bigger picture. The credits of the following part goes widely to Brother Alain Bernheim, who wrote a groundbreaking article about the foundation of the United Grand Lodges in the Coetzee Journal. Remember, in June 1945, Germany was divided into 4 occupation zones. In addition, Berlin was blockaded between June 1948 and May 1949. This political situation influenced the way in which German Freemasonry began to reconstitute itself. Throughout the 3 zones of Western Germany, occupied by the American, British, and French forces, very similar movements, as shown in the example of my mother lodge, can be found. On the 14th and 15th of June 1947, A meeting was held in Frankfurt, chaired by Brother August Paul, and 23 brothers gathered from all jurisdictions. Only the Order of Freemasons was not invited. The symbolic Grand Lodge was represented by Brother Zelda. The meeting was organized by the President of Frankfurt. In the history of German Masonry, it is remembered under the name the Convent of Frankfurt, and it marked a turning point in the aspirations to form a new and united Grand Lodge of Germany. In his opening address, Paul said during the 12 years of the Nazi regime, aside from inglorious exceptions, German Freemasons had been faithful to their ideals. Another brother mentioned the will to forget the dissensions of the past, and it was declared, "We want to let the past be buried." Minutes of these meetings show an agreement to keep silent about a way in which a very large majority of German Freemasons behaved as soon as Hitler came to power. Literally, the President decided to sweep it all under the big Masonic rug. As a result of the Convent of Frankfurt, the Frankfurt Association of Freemason Lodges was founded. Its purpose was to build a bridge and be a transition on the way toward one Grand Lodge for Germany. Lord Schlesing joined the association, and so did others. A resolution was proposed declaring that there shall be just one Freemasonry of St. John in Germany, not divided by the terms Christian or humanitarian. In the second meeting, the resolution was passed by all members of the convent. The way seemed to be open for the new United Grand Lodge. In June 1948, a ceremony was held to recognize the first Democratic National Assembly of 1848. The Frankfurt Association of Lodges invited all German Masons to a Masonic ceremony at the eve of this event, and over 300 brethren from 125 lodges from all over Western Germany accepted the invitation and arrived. And with a high certainty, we can state that this was the first national Masonic meeting after the war. The ritual was written by Brother Salter. The meeting itself was organized by all the brothers of Frankfurt. The executive members of the association had hoped that with the mood of the meeting, the new Grand Lodge could be proclaimed and by acclamation of the brethren founded, but it did not happen. Because shortly before the meeting, Brother Theodor Vogel, the Grandmaster of the Reformed Grand Lodge of the Sun in Bayreuth, stated that the 31 lodges in Bavaria represented by him would resist such a move. Vogel had thus underlined his claim for leadership and founded the next day the German Association of Grand Masters in Frankfurt. And they held a conference as well in Frankfurt and attempted to formulate a basis on which German Freemasons could begin to work again. It was generally accepted that unity could only be preserved by establishing a Grand Lodge on a humanitarian basis. Humanitarian means open to men of all faiths, contrary to the Christian Grand Lodges. They also decided that the proposed Grand Lodge should be open to members of Masonic bodies considered irregular before 1933. In August in Baden-Baden, proposals were made to the Grand Master of the GLL, the Swedish system, to enable to join the United Grand Lodge, but he declined. Brother Vogel always tried to reach an agreement with the order and tried to make them join the new Grand Lodge, but in the end, his efforts were not successful. The Order of Freemasons did not join because the differences were insurmountable, especially with the question of the higher degrees of the Swedish Rite. To join the United Grand Lodge, the Order of Freemasons would have had to sever its ties between the craft degrees and the high degrees. And it would have had to soften the condition to be of the Christian faith for initiation. Also not a complete success, the foundation of the United Grand Lodge in Germany was an important and in some ways a very successful step on the way to unity. And on the 19th of June, the first annual assembly of the new Grand Lodge was held at Offenbach with delegates from 150 lodges from all over Germany. On the following day, in a very impressive ceremony in the Paulskirche in Frankfurt, the new Grand Lodge was officially installed under the leadership of Brother Vogel. From the two German Grand Lodges, the Grand Lodge of Hamburg and the symbolic Grand Lodge of Germany, which had rescued the Masonic light and kept it shining in exile in Chile and Palestine, the light was brought back to the Grand Lodge of Germany. And it's important to understand the symbolism of this assembly held at the Paulskirche in Frankfurt, because this was a place where the first democratic assembly of for whole Germany was held in the revolutionary years of 1848. And so to choose the Paulskirche for the first assembly of this Grand Lodge was a strong symbolism for the will of unity. So the VGL was established on that day with Louis Bonnard, the Grand Master of the Grand Orient de France, as the head of the delegation of the foreign guests. And this might seem odd to us, but back in 45, in the French occupation zone, the brothers of the Grand Orient and the Grand Lodge de France made a great effort to rebuild the lodges of this area without trying to introduce their system. Therefore, the relations were friendly, and the attendance of the Grand Master of the Grand Orient seemed to be natural for the brothers back then. However, the new Grand Lodge did not include the GLL and the Grand Lodge of the Three Globes and the Berlin lodges, which continued to exist as grand bodies. The way to the system of the United Grand Lodges, which we enjoy today, was stony. But the start of the VGL was extremely successful. Within a year, the new Grand Lodge was recognized by over 40 Grand Lodges throughout the world. In 1954, it gained recognition by England. At the same time, the Grand Land Lodges, the GLL, regained re-recognition by the Swedish Rite. The following years have seen heated and fruitless negotiations between the VGL and the GLL. There were still many bitter feelings about the behavior of the old Prussian Grand Lodges toward the Weimar Republic and the Nazi regime. This German mess led to an uncomfortable situation for the British Grand Lodges, as well as for the Swedish Rite. The British Grand Lodge with Sweden through the Oslo Convention. The Scandinavians had re-recognized the GLL. The United Grand Lodge had recognized the VGL, the United Grand Lodge, but both German Grand Lodges did not recognize each other. After many negotiations with each single side, a conference took place in London in June 1957. Besides the three British Grand Lodges, the conference was attended by Grand Lodges of Denmark, of Norway, of Sweden, the French National Grand Lodge, and the Grand East of the Netherlands, the VGL and the GLL. Exchanges of different points of view were brought up by the German Grand Lodges again, and this brought Sir Ernest Cooper, the head of the Committee of Foreign Affairs, to declare, and I think we still can sense his impatience. This goes into too many details. We do not want to be concerned with a vast quantity of German Masonic history, which does not interest us and which we do not intend to hear. It will only take too much time if we have to listen to the history of German Freemasonry again. Rolf von Heidenstam, the Chancellor of the Grand Lodge of Sweden, said, "You must unite. For the youth, for the future, you should get every help, but unite." And finally they did. In May '58, both German Grand Lodges held general assemblies. The GLL met at noon in Berlin and approved the Magna Carta, the constitution of the United Grand Lodge. Informed at 1 o'clock, the VGL met 1 hour later and approved the Magna Carta as well. The first meeting of the United Grand Lodges of Germany, the Brotherhood of German Freemasons, took place in Berlin in September '58, when Theodor Vogel was again elected as a Grand Master. So we have a happy end at least. Not really. because this new body was not yet recognized by the British Grand Lodges. Brother James Stubbs wrote in his memories about a visit in Germany in 1958. I satisfied myself and subsequently the Board of General Purposes that the overriding body which was going to be established with full power of foreign relations was sufficiently close to the normal concept of a Grand Lodge for it to be capable of recognition, thus solving the problem that the European Conference in London of the previous year had underlined. In due course, the United Grand Lodges was recognized, however ungrammatical it may sound. So far so good, you might think. Perhaps a little tired of the trials and tribulations of the brothers in Germany. But it was not all good, because heavy clouds came in from Scotland. On the 12th May 59, Brother Alex Buchan, Grand Secretary of the Grand Lodge of Scotland, sent a long letter to Grandmaster Vogel, in which he wrote, "A meeting between representatives of the Grand Lodges of England, Ireland, and Scotland took place in the presence of the three Grand Masters on Tuesday, 14th April 1959. You will, I feel sure, know that we were predisposed in favor of recognition of the United Grand Lodges of Germany, which you had created in response to the suggestions made to you in London in June 57. But when we came together, we all found ourselves much concerned over your membership of the Luxembourg Convention. This concern has been intensified by recent events in connection with the Grand Lodge de France. Indeed, I am afraid that I must put it to you that your recognition of the Grand Lodge of France is an absolute bar to your recognition by these Grand Lodges, which are not prepared to accept statements that the Grand Lodge of France is a regular Masonic body. We are much strengthened in his attitude by a speech recently made by Brother Davidson, in which he clearly advocated, according to our reading of it, the view that the volume of the sacred law may be accepted, if so desired, simply as a piece of furniture or an empty symbol. We are all convinced that any effort made by the Grand Lodge of France to appear regular is not a matter of heart, but of expediency, for otherwise they would have discontinued the association with the atheistic Corps Oriol de France, which they do not have done. He invited the German president to further discuss the issue, and again a conference in London was held 6 weeks later. The German representatives found themselves facing a group of 11 dignitaries of the three British Grand Lodges. The president of the Board of General Purposes, Brother Frere, brought it to the point. I think we can only say this, which we have said even 3 times already. If the Grand Lodges of Germany wishes to recognize the Grand Lodge of France as regular, then we cannot in any circumstances recognize the Grand Lodges of Germany. And further than that, I don't think we can go. On the 2nd November 1960, the VGL broke off its relations with the Grand Lodge of France and was recognized by the United Grand Lodge of England on the 7th December. That move left hurt feelings on both sides of the German-French border because of the helpful hands the French brethren have lended when the German Masons needed to help to rebuild the craft. And of course, the vow Brother Vogel made. He vowed that the bond between the Grand Oriol and the United Grand Lodge was unbreakable. Later, in 1947, the VGL of Germany were joined by the Grand Lodge of the Three Globes, the Grand Lodge of British Freemasonry in Germany, and the American Canadian Grand Lodge. So finally, my story reached its end. And in 2019, we had 268 lodges with nearly 10,000 brethren within the Grand Lodge AF and AM, 101 lodges with 3,300 brethren within the GLL, 47 lodges with 860 brethren within the Three Globes, 49 lodges with 945 brethren of the ACGL, the American Canadian Grand Lodge, 18 lodges with 414 brethren of the Grand Lodge of British Freemasons in Germany, and one lodge was in the Grand Lodge of British Freemasons working Scottish Ritual, which is a lodge Sissel and Saltire, number 1040. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Brother Rolf, Kyle, thank you once again for coming along to the Lodge Hope of Karachi Lockdown Lecture Series and giving us such an interesting insight into the development and history of Freemasonry in your country, Germany. I think it's such an interesting topic that has so many connections to us all because of history, and to understand and hear firsthand the challenges that the Masonic community faced in the aftermath of the war and how they pulled together to bring that light of Masonry back alive in Germany was certainly something to congratulate and praise those brethren who had that determination to do so. Rolf, thank you so much for that. It's when I was serving in the Air Force, I was in Germany, and I visited a variety of lodges under the Grand Lodge of British Freemasons in Germany, in particular Star of Saxony and Mönchengladbach area. And I'm just sort of waffling, Bern and Rolf, until I get to the questions, because I saw there was quite a few questions coming in. You see, because it is such an interesting comment, and I think that there was a few that I think you've maybe got a loose wire in your headphones as well, Rolf. Every now and again, if you went further to your left, we got a little bit of interference. So the first question, is the strict observance still in use in Germany?
No, no. The strict observance died shortly after the convent of Wilhelmsbad. It has a kind of afterlife in the rectified rite, which is not working in Germany. They do have one lodge in Offenbach, but it's really still a few lodges working in Switzerland. But the strict observance isn't working anymore.
Okay, thank you. That was a question from Brother Eagle over in Canada. Brother Ron Mann from Dunern 400 asks, what happened to any and all of the lodges in East Berlin? And I would extend that to the whole of East Germany.
Well, they were closed down by the Nazi regime and they weren't allowed to open again under the Soviet occupation forces.
Okay. Bob Phillips, immediate past master of 1373, is asking, how did the forget-me-not fit in around the ban on Freemasonry?
Well, yeah, the forget-me-not. I'm sorry to say that the forget-me-not is a very nice story, which Brother Vogel, which was not only the unifier of German Freemasonry, but also fisher of men and a teller of tales, invited more or less. He brought the subject of the forget-me-not to life when Germany in the afterwar time was visited by a group of American Freemasons, and he more or less invited the myth of the forget-me-not. There's a perfect article from Brother Alan Bernheim where he shows that it's nearly impossible that the brethren in Germany had used the forget-me-not indeed as a hidden sign. This might have happened maybe in a lodge or maybe in a very, very small group, but definitely not as a sign where Masons throughout Germany did recognize each other and remember that in the whole of Germany, there never was more than 80,000 brethren at all. So it's very, very unlikely.
So one of those lovely allegories that has attached itself to our craft. And I think our friends in the regalia suppliers do quite nicely with the forget-me-not and the little story about that. Dickon Sandbach has a comment and a question. The Allied forces had a rule of non-fraternization. Did any Allied forces attend lodges in the years immediately after the end of the war, do you know?
What we know is that the American forces indeed invited, after the foundation of the United Grand Lodge, invited the German brethren in. And as you see, the VGL was founded in 49, and 1 year after, it was recognized by more than 10 North American Grand Lodges, which sought and received brotherly contact.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Another question from Eagle over in Canada. Do Schleswig-Holstein still have strong ties with Danish lodges, the lodges up there in the north?
Yes, yes, absolutely. I personally know some brothers who visit regularly with Danish lodges and vice versa.
Okay, thank you, Rolf. And there's a follow-on. A lot of Masons escaped to Scandinavia prior to the war. Did they return to aid in the building of the Grand Lodge of Germany, or the Grand Lodges in Germany?
Can you say it again? I haven't heard it.
A lot of Masons escaped to Scandinavia prior to the war. Did they return to aid in building of the Grand Lodges in Germany?
I don't know. I have no information about this.
Okay, thank you. A comment from Ian Bailey, fantastic, a lesson to us all. David Brown, Right Worship Master, number 76. Excellent lecture, Brother Kiel. In 1941, the Masonic Temple in Jersey in the Channel Islands was sacked on the orders of Alfred Rosenberg, with much material taken to Berlin for an anti-Masonic exhibition. Can you tell us anything about this exhibition? And sorry if you covered this in your earlier lecture.
No, indeed I haven't. And there were a few anti-Masonic exhibitions where they made a travesty out of our temples, and where they showed the regalia. And yeah, as I said, they tried to make a travesty out of the things we're doing. And I can't really tell what happened to the items of the Masonic Temple of Jersey, but many lodge items were looted throughout the land and were shown in this kind of exhibitions in different German cities.
One of your German Brenner says, Vielen Dank, Bruder Rolf. So I think that's my passable schoolboy German there, Brian. Great lecture, great lecture. Ian Kennedy asks, I may be preempting another talk here. How did Freemasonry fare under Soviet occupation? And I would say, to start with, Ian, you actually are preempting. I've hopefully got someone up my sleeve that can come and talk to us about Freemasonry in Russia. But we will pose the question to you just now, Rolf, if you know the answer.
Yes, indeed. And under Soviet occupation, the lodges were not able to reopen. Freemasonry was forbidden by the Nazi regime, and it stays forbidden under the Soviet rule.
Yeah, I think it's another country with a huge Masonic history that really needs to be explored and understood. And I think at times we look at it through the lens of the three home Grand Lodges, and we don't appreciate and understand the challenges of Masonry elsewhere. Brother John Belton, a marvellous talk, and so good to see it from the point of view of the brothers. The behaviours of UGLE at the last meeting of 1959, the way they treated the German Grand Master, and especially the Dutch Grand Master Davidson, remains a matter of great shame to me. And I think we will all have our thoughts on that. And I think, yeah, brotherly love needs to prevail, yes, brethren.
Absolutely.
Michael Monroe asks, are there any lodges today in the former East Germany?
Yes, indeed. Indeed. After the reunification, great efforts were made to rebuild Freemasonry in the east of Germany. And there are a few lodges by all Grand Lodges within the United Grand Lodges of Germany. And the president of the West German lodges helped and had partner lodges in the east, which they tried to build up. So yes, indeed. Very lively Freemasonry in the east of Germany.
Thank you, Rolf. I did manage to visit one of the temples in Berlin, but I couldn't take in a meeting. But it was a beautiful building. And the caretaker, the brother who sort of stayed on site, was very generous with his time and showing me around. A comment from Eagle: excellent lecture. Some Masonic artifacts have been found in Eastern Europe after the war. And Heiko Rupert de Campbell, as far as I know, the Anti-Masonic Museum in Berlin, where the exhibition took place, did not survive the last Allied air raids in Berlin.
Might well be.
So I think that's a very fitting final comment, as it was a very final ending for that anti-Masonic propaganda campaign. Brother Rolf, Kyle, once again, on behalf of the members of Lodge Hope of Karachi and all our visitors here this evening at our lockdown lecture, can I thank you again for your time, for your knowledge, and for your efforts in pulling all that together for us this evening. I'm sure the Bren have very much enjoyed that. Bren, at this time, I usually announce next week's speaker. I'm going to keep that one under wraps. I'm just waiting to finalise the timings of the next 2 weeks' speakers, and I'm not sure which one will be which as yet. But we will be here next Tuesday evening at 7 p.m, and I look forward to you all joining us again. This meeting will continue later on the Facebook pages, Bern, so if you've got any comments. And the one thing I would suggest to anybody, Brother Rolf mentioned his mother lodge, Lodge Lessing. Lessing himself is a very interesting brother to have a read about.
Indeed.
So if you start at Wikipedia with Lessing and go from there, and I'll post some information about him, there is a really nice story behind the man as well. Rolf, thank you. Brian, please unmute yourself and say your traditional thank yous and good nights to our guest speaker.
Thank you, Rolf. Very interesting indeed.
Bye-bye, Rolf.
Yes, Brother Rolf, that was excellent. Again, once again, it was brilliant. Thank you very much
Thank you
indeed.
very much.
Good man.
Thank you very much, Rolf, for the brilliant lecture.
I found a number of Lodge Knives in
Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Very interesting.
Thank you, Brother Rolf. It was most interesting.
Thanks for that lecture.
Yep, superb, Brother Rolf. Well done.
Thank you, Brother Rolf.
Thanks, Brother Rolf. Really enjoyed that. Excellent lecture. Thank you. And thanks to you, God, for organising as well. Thank you.
Thank Gordon.
Brother Rolf, excellent. Very, very, very good.
Brother Rolf, absolutely fascinating. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Rolf. Really enjoyed that. Thank you.
Great.
Great lecture.
Thank you, Brother Rolf. Very clear, informative. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Brother Gordon. Thanks for organising.
Cheers, Alec.
Well done, guys. Stay out of the snow. See you all next week.
Cheers, Sam.
See you.
Cheers, Sam.
Yeah, cheers.
Hey, boys.
Yeah.
Nice to-
You, bye.
Bye.
Okay, Bren, I'm going to give you 5.
Thanks, Rolf.
Thanks
very much for your lecture.
Gordon,
All the best.
Thank you.
Apologies for being late. Thank you very much.
Cheers, Rolf. Slaf gut.
Danke. Du auch.
That was a Cold War warrior German there, I think.
Hey, watch it, you. Just because I'm a founder member of Lodge in Germany, you stop.
All the best, brother. See you next week.
Cheers, Callum.
Thank you, brother.
And 3, Bren. And 2.
Thank you very much, Brother Rolf, for a very enjoyable talk. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
And 1, Bren. And good night, and thank you all very much.